We have a superb representative group here to put this. Valerie Hackl from Austrocontrol is going to give us the air traffic control perspective, but she will not be here to take all the blame for every country's air traffic control failings. At least I hope not. Paul Griffiths will happily take the blame. He is from DXB, but he is one of those people who will tell us exactly what the airports need to do. Juha Järvinen is the chief commercial at Virgin Atlantic and is going to give us the perspective from the airline, who will happily blame everybody else but themselves for how they managed to handle their own supply and demand. And then you have at the end Christina Cassotis, CEO at Pittsburgh. Well done. You're going to tell us, I hope, that it's the federal government's problem, that the airline's overscheduled, that you were fine. You had employed enough people in enough places, and if only everybody else had behaved. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what we're going to talk about. I'm starting with you.
Thank you.
Scott Kirby at United told me yesterday that he believes that that United has done enough what it can do, but it's even cancelled flights. It's taken flights out of the schedule, but it can't do it all.
No, none of us can. We're an ecosystem. It's not an airline industry, it's an aviation industry. And one of the things that we're facing in the US, we didn't have the staff ramp-up period, shortage concerns that a lot of Europeans have, but we do have a pipeline issue for workforce, particularly in air traffic control. And what I find interesting about that is that as you are holding flights or metering flights, you're actually contributing to our other big problem in this industry, which is sustainability. So we have a direct link between workforce, qualified workforce in the FAA, in the air traffic control, and also with what's going on with the environment. And I think we need to understand that this is a bigger issue than just what are we doing to take care of aviation.
Okay, but in a sense, I'll grant you all the wiggle room of poor ramp up last year, because it was different, it was new and all of that. But this systemic idea that there aren't enough, even on a good day, there aren't enough air traffic controllers, that's more serious.
Absolutely. Let me please say I'm quite happy to be invited this year to your conference, because actually, if you look at the causes for the delays, air traffic control comes somewhere at rank 3, 4, 5.
Behind?
Behind. Well, in Europe it was reactionary delays caused from missed connections, offload of flights, etc. Staff shortage from airlines and airports. And actually the ANSPs were the ones who delivered the capacity in general, because we had systems in place during the pandemic situation, at least in Europe, with short time work, and we had to keep up the operations, unlike the airlines and the airports who were able and did lay off staff. So I think there's
so it's your fault. It's your fault, and it's your fault.
Well, I think the thing is, look, let's go back to basics here. One of the most difficult things about the human psyche is the ability to imagine what things are going to be like in the future in the case of things that we've not experienced before. And if I parallel Newton's third law and say for every pandemic there's an equal and opposite recovery, why at the beginning of the pandemic did everyone not say, this is turbulence, this is not a permanent change in the weather, and therefore let's seek innovative ways of making sure we hunker down, minimize our expenditure, but be ready for the hockey stick of recovery. That's exactly what we did, and we haven't had any of those supply chain issues as a result. And I found it amazing that shareholders and people running businesses around the world panicked so much and let so many highly trained and specialized people go, not anticipating the fact it was going to be very difficult and very expensive to get them back. So there was a false economy there.
It was a false economy, but you speak from the luxury of a state-owned enterprise that doesn't have to make a profit and doesn't have shareholders.
No, that's not true, Richard. We have a common shareholder.
Which is the state.
That shareholder happens to be the government, but I'm under the same commercial pressure that every other airport owner around the world is under. And the thing is, you see, look.
Right, well, hang on, Paul. So it's your fault. You were scheduling too many flights. Certainly in the US, you scheduled more flights than the entire system could cope with. You're to blame.
First, I would start with the fact that from an airline perspective, none of us knew how long the COVID crisis will last. And in the case of Virgin Atlantic, it was about survival. We didn't have the luxury to keep all the staff. We had to reduce staff by 45%. There was absolutely no other option in order for us to survive in a case where the UK government did not support the airlines in our local markets. That was a fact, but I think what we failed as an ecosystem, just like we said here, is the fact that we didn't come together systematically to try to control it. In the UK, I have to say that I'm very proud actually how the airline industry together with airports came together to try to help the UK government to come to some senses how they were managing the restrictions. Can't say that we were fully successful, but at least we gave them traffic light systems. We tried to come up with systems to try to mitigate the chaos that we had in the UK. And there, I think I would claim that actually the airline industry, together with the airports, actually tried to rescue as much as we could in the early stages of the pandemic.
So you introduced the words blame and fault, but overall I think we have those problems all together and we have to join forces. So the dynamic here are
right.
We have to participate and improve all together probably.
Yes, but the failure was spectacular. And the lack of cooperation/coordination was almost textbook for how not to do it.
Well, absolutely. Why is it in 2020, when in May we had as many passengers through our airport in 4 hours than we had the previous May sorry, the other way around. We had as many passengers in the whole month that we had in 4 hours in the previous May in 2019. And yet we could travel to more cities with a largely unvaccinated population compared to 2021, when most people were vaccinated and couldn't travel. That systemic failure, which wiped billions of dollars off the value of our industry, came from a lack of government coordination. It was pathetic, and I was at the sharp end of having to deal with that head on, and I just couldn't get any logic.
Right, so you get out of the pandemic. So let's move to 22. And I understand the difficulties of ramp up, and it did happen faster and quicker in many ways than would have reasonably been predicted. Let's be neutral on that. But now we're in 23, and airlines in the US are actually cancelling flights because they say the system cannot cope.
And they don't have enough capacity. I mean, they don't have enough, there's so much demand still. People want to fly, and I respectfully disagree that we couldn't have predicted the return to flight. People were desperate. People fly for very important reasons, and those reasons didn't go away because there was a pandemic. Business still had to be done, families still had to be visited. We are in the business of connecting people. It's what we do. So to think that once we all got vaccinated or the vaccines became available, that it would sort of meter back, that's crazy. Which is why in the US, we were very lucky, and I do appreciate the perspective that you bring, because we were aided. The airlines and the airports, specifically, the airports were called out in order to retain 90% of our staff, so that the minute travel came back, we were ready.
But it's not a sort of linear, well, in a sense that different parts of the world could see what was happening in other parts of the world.
Correct.
So, in a sense, so if you take the reopening, you've really got Europe having a ham-fisted attempt in 21 with Greece and a few other people. But you could see then that it was getting going. And by the time the US comes on stream, you've got a domestic that's pretty good. And now Asia Pacific, God knows how they can't have worked out what it's going to be like.
But a good example is 8th of November 2021. It wasn't many weeks before that we knew that US will open up. And think about Heathrow or UK as a classical example, as the biggest corridor. It was impossible for any airline or airport to originally plan for how will that massive corridor will open up, because it was under the control, of course, the government guidelines. So it was extremely difficult. But as soon as we got clarity on the borders opening up, the airlines, airports were obviously doing the forecast for 2022. What was unique about certain airports like Heathrow, that they had their own interest to plan some other numbers that they needed for other purposes than for actually ramping up. That was very Heathrow specific. But we had a massive issue on making sure that we get all the airports, the operations ramping up, pilot trained.
Where do you think we are now?
Well, we haven't touched upon another crisis that appeared last year, namely the Ukraine war. And from one moment to the other, 20% of the airspace, at least in Europe, was shut down. So we had to reshuffle all traffic flows in Europe, and this is still the case. So this, if we look at this year, it's still the case. So we have to operate with almost 2019 traffic numbers with 20% less airspace, so this will be a challenge by itself.
But you also have to operate under those conditions in archaic circumstances where you do not have an optimally efficient air traffic system.
We are highly fragmented in Europe, we know that. And
does that piss you off that you've said this a million times and the politicians don't listen?
Well, there are, of course, pros and cons, and we shouldn't forget that now we are talking about sovereign territories as well, with a war just in front or in the middle of where we live in Europe. Of course, sovereignty becomes an issue that nobody would like to give up. And one can say, okay, what happened the last 20 years? There were some improvements in place, but I agree. I mean, we cannot neglect that we are not efficient with this highly fragmented system. It is what it is.
So it's not unreasonable for me to say, dreadful that the war is, it's also going to be used by countries, EU countries, as a way of preventing further movement to single European skies. Why would we open up? There's a war, we need to have sovereignty of our airspace. You're agreeing?
Absolutely. And I mean, like we said, it's been going on forever, but it has to be solved. When we talk about sustainability, that was the opening speech here as well, we need to get the airspace sorted out. It's embarrassing for Europe that we are in this situation.
And it's a fix that we know has an immediate impact, and we've known it for a long time. I mean, we all know this. I don't think it's without its challenges, but it is actually impacting the whole world, right? I mean, there's nothing that exists in a silo in this industry. If one part of the world is not efficient, it will therefore drive inefficiency in the rest of the world.
Right, and that inefficiency of non-single European skies, that inefficiency goes on steroids when you have a strike.
Well, there were strikes last year, there are strikes this year. They are usually local, so you can't say Europe, there was strike, but I think France has a certain propensity to strike. We have seen strikes in Germany, we have even seen strikes in Austria, but not in the aviation industry, but for the railways, and of course there are spillover effects. But one has to say this is a democratic right. And we're in the same boat here all together. I'm not happy with, industrial action in my company. I try to prevent it by all means.
But you'd prefer, for example, the option which I know Willie has talked about, many have talked about, that, fine, you want to strike in France, affect French aviation, affect to and from France, but overflight carries on. Would you be supporting of that? High altitude overflight carries on.
Well, it would help me in my management function, yes.
I think the thing is, I pick up on what Christine was saying earlier. We are an ecosystem. And I think it was Winston Churchill that said, never waste a good crisis. And a lot of other industries have not wasted this crisis. They've invested heavily in technology. Look at the retail industry. We are still existing in some sectors within the aviation industry on technology that goes back 50 years or more. We've wasted the opportunity to join all that together and create this single ecosystem. Single European skies has been on the agenda since I was in short trousers, and I think will probably continue to be on the agenda. And I think until the industry wakes up and sees the opportunities that technology is bringing in terms of efficiency to other industries and embraces that with both arms, we are always going to have these problems.
You see, the US, much can be learned from the US. And I always say about the US, it is usually late to the party, but once it gets there, it parties better than everybody else. And a good example, again on delays and operational challenges, is global entry.
Right.
Which, works fantastically. And if you look at air traffic control with Next Gen, now you've had a few, I see you're wincing in pain, but the money's there, the recent incidents have given it new impetus, it's going to move forward faster.
Do you believe that? Because I want to. But I feel the same way about that as I do about the single European sky. We've been talking about Next Gen for years. And the technology is there. And we're not using it the way that we should. And it's therefore affecting, so we're doing our part, by the way, to contribute to the inefficiencies to the system, because we don't have the type of Next Gen, which, by the way, will have impacts on climate and will drive sustainability goals. We'll be able to achieve them better if we have Next Gen. So why aren't we doing it?
Answer your own question.
Well, I can't be polite. So I don't know how to answer that. Because because of the way that we fund the FAA and because of the way that we appropriate resources to, by the way, what I would consider to be national critical transportation infrastructure, and I mean the air traffic control system, the airports, the airlines, et cetera. So if this is, look at what happened when the volcano shut down European flying for, 4 days?
Can any of you pronounce it? I can't.
No.
I just sort of get away with saying E15.
But I thought we would finally understand this industry is critical. We need it every single day to work well. So shouldn't we be investing, sort of optimizing always for safety and efficiency? Wouldn't that drive sustainability and workforce and all of the things that we need? Why are we not doing this? And why are we not coordinating?
Well, I don't think the political will is there. That's the problem. I can speak, I think, for the UAE, who has an industry worth about $50 billion a year in travel and tourism, and the government there understands that. I have the same boss as Emirates has. If there's any lack of understanding about travel and tourism in the UAE, I've never encountered it in the last 15 years.
No, but you have the most dreadful air traffic control delays and problems going into and out of DXB.
I'm not entirely sure that's true, Richard. If you look at us compared to other jurisdictions, we're pretty good at it and trying to get better.
The cleaner's white shirt in the laundry.
Yeah. But I think the thing is, look, until we have effective representation across governments to actually drive the travel and tourism agenda forward with the value it generates and the jobs it generates globally compared to other industries. When the automotive industry hits turbulence, their lobbying impact is absolutely palpable. I mean, they were paying people to buy new cars. We don't have that lobbying power, and therefore it's not going to be possible to get the degree of coordination across borders to fix this problem. I think that is the fundamental problem.
Okay, so I agree with you, especially with the point that technology will be the key to make things change and improve this whole system. However, we shouldn't neglect the DNA of our industry. Whenever the DNA of our industry, whenever you try to use incremental improvements, everybody says, "Oh, is this proven? Where's the safety assessment? Can we do that? Oh no, we shouldn't do that. We have to show evidence that ABC." This makes it really tough for everyone in this industry to make improvements.
Well, we can.
I would almost say that I think the unique chance that we have now compared to the previous decades where nothing happened is actually under the heading of sustainability, because that should be driving politicians together, the companies together, the citizens of countries together.
It's not.
Not yet, but that is the only hope that we have collectively to actually see it from a different perspective, not only from an airline or airport efficiency perspective, to actually have a concrete impact on sustainability.
So I want to shift from the, if you like, nuts and bolts of what went wrong and ramp up and all of those sort of things and strikes to then what I think is the more conceptual and philosophical point, which is what you raised, which is, yes, this industry, and by that I don't just mean aviation, I mean aviation, travel and tourism, is an ecosystem, but it doesn't act like one.
No.
The answer is, tell me why and what we can do to do it. I mean, if you couldn't get it right after a pandemic, and you can't get it right during ramp up, and my biggest concern of all is now the airlines are making a little bit of money, it's all fine and good again. So what's wrong? What needs to happen to make it mesh?
Well, I think first of all, that collaboration needs to happen, and that's going to be very difficult. And I think the thing is, you know, the issue of safety is always paramount. We know that. But many, many other industries are evolving safer, better products at a far faster rate than we are in air traffic control in particular. The technology is there. We need to adopt it quicker, and we need to coordinate better.
Back up into your answer. I let you finish, but I wanted to stop you after you'd said the words, collaboration is going to be difficult. Explain why.
Because I think at the start of the pandemic, there was this belief that if we were able to get a coordinated system of response, then the industry would recover quicker. IATA made great moves in that direction, but the problem was different governments had different processes, and it was absolutely apparent that that was where the problem was. You cannot get cross-border collaboration in the way that the ecosystem of this industry absolutely needs.
I think there's not a sense of urgency. If you take a look at what happened in the pandemic and all of the scientists that were involved in figuring out the vaccine, we were all rooting for whoever was going to come up with it first. It wasn't, oh, I hope it's the Americans, or I hope it's not. Let's just fix this. And because there was a sense of urgency and everything was on the line. And I feel like one of the things that we don't do well as an industry is talk about the sense of urgency that if we don't fix it is going to lead, really, you're right, people can't envision.
But why don't we? Because you're really just restating the problem.
So why aren't we doing it?
Yes.
Well, I'd love to, you know, because I don't always think that we look at ourselves as an ecosystem. We're at the bottom of the barrel in the world of aviation, all right? There's the manufacturers, there's the airlines, and then there's the airports. And I don't necessarily see that we come together in the air traffic control and the federal government and the tourism sector, and I think everybody's sort of looking after their own interests and not understanding that we're not up here.
Wouldn't that be an amazing goal for the 80th IATA Symposium next year in Dubai, that we together, IATA, ACI, all the organizations that actually are representing all of us.
Do you think they can do it?
Don't we put a public challenge that for Dubai next year,
but
we actually have
is,
a discussion, because we are so easy at throwing, we're good at throwing stones at the airports, you throw at stones at us, but actually we even, as an IATA, I would say, as a member, do we do enough actually to do something about it? We have 1 year to Dubai, we have Dubai airports here. Should we have an ambition for next year in Dubai that we as an industry, because we can't rely on politicians to do it, let's face it.
I think we need to
start. I need to just pause you, because I can feel. I didn't even need to look. I can feel.
See, right.
Go on. You can't resist.
Here it comes.
Here we go.
There it
Petrol on the flames. Off we go. All we need is Akbar. Where are you?
Well, now that I have a microphone, can I just address the delays situation? Because although you're quite right that ATC is number 4 on the list, there's been a 500% increase in delays attributable to ATC, at the same time as there's been a 17% increase in delays attributable to airlines. So, you know, the idea that we don't have a problem with ATC in Europe, and they're Eurocontrol figures, they're not my figures, that's based on what Eurocontrol is saying in the first quarter of 2023. Look, I think it'd be great if we can all talk to one another, and I've said this about airlines and airports. We probably have about 80% common ground where we could work and collaborate and make a difference. But the 20% where we don't disagree, it's violent disagreement which gets in the way of everything else that we try to do. So while I'd love to think that I could sit down with my colleagues in ACI, I know that I will spend the next year trying to reach agreement on the agenda, and we won't have made any progress. That's not to say I won't try, but I wouldn't hold out any expectations that you're going to see me standing on the stage with ACI next year. I'll stand on the stage with Paul.
Well, you may well end up doing that, but thank you, sir.
But in a way, then we are saying that we can't solve it.
Sorry?
So then the question is, the fact is that we are unable to solve it as an ecosystem.
But I think, it's interesting because where it really shows up in the communities is at the airports, because every single politician in Washington, D.C. is taking care of their little airport in their community. And there's a lot of interest in making sure that is going to continue to serve their constituents. So there may be a way to, maybe you start small and then it expands.
But I have a fundamental problem here. And that is, I think, the trouble is, we all think we're managing little silos of this industry. But actually, the problem is that we haven't grasped the fact we're all in the same business, and we are all managing hospitality. We are all here for the customer, whoever owns it. And if we could actually settle our difference and say, if we do not fix our problem, there is one casualty, and that is the common customer that runs across all the threads.
But isn't exactly what you're all exhibiting the reason why the 2% of aviation emissions is considered by the public to be much worse than it is? It is a failure of you all. And yeah, go on, you can blame me. Somebody will blame the media at some point. Go ahead, my back is broad. It's only taken 18 minutes to get this far. But this is the reason why, because you may well be an ecosystem, but you're not acting as one.
Can only agree. It's so much easier to point the finger to someone, and actually to the gentleman, I would like to compare the statistics that you read and that I read, but let's keep it for after this session. I'm pretty sure that ATC, at least in Europe, wasn't the biggest cause for delays, not at all. It was 80% stemming from airlines and reactionary delays, but doesn't matter. See, that's my reaction to it. So yeah, we are pointing fingers to each other, and we are all frustrated probably because we want it to work, right? We want the passengers to be happy. That's our mission.
But we are. We are. And we that's why we're here. We are here so that we can understand we cannot exist. An airport cannot exist without airlines. So we have to understand what the airlines are up against so that we can work with them, so that we can solve...
It's circular, though. It's circular, and there's no way that I can see to break, because of the political will argument or the vested interest argument. No one doubts for a minute. The airlines need you need the airlines, both of you need ATC, they all need the customers. Of course, it's an ecosystem and it's circular. But it's structurally inefficient, and nobody's got the political will to break the Gordian knot.
I was in Italy last week, and I went to see a series of manufacturers, and I was intrigued that they all have a set of different suppliers for the same component, because if one supplier goes bad, then they can rely on others. Our ecosystem, unfortunately, is a collection of monopolies. And unless you incentivize monopolies in the right way through regulation and proper KPIs, you're going to get the fractured behavior you discuss. Until we start remunerating, dare I say, ATC on the basis of the minimum delay minutes caused to customers, unless you start penalizing the airports around the customer service standards they're providing. I now have a supplier who provides my frontline customer service. They don't get paid as much one month if the service standards...
He does get penalized. he does get penalised either under UK or EU 261 or a raft of, or an entire raft of other
do pay.
regulations. Would you be in favour of seeing the airports penalised?
I think this should reflect on the
I think-
entire ecosystem.
Because we need to play one game, because at
Right,
the end of the
but-
day, it's an end-to-end customer journey, which we all have.
But let's not get governments to put that in place. Let's
Oh, well,
try
it's
and get it
coming
ourselves.
to us because now they're looking at 261 in the U.S. and we're like, whoa, that's not going to be an answer. And I don't think the airports want to see the airlines get that either because it creates the fundamental
Right.
perspective that we need to disincentivize as opposed to incentivize. And one of the things I do think that we're doing well in the U.S., and we heard this on the last panel, is through this investment in sustainability, right? By creating incentives, it gives somebody like us an ability to say, okay, how do we help the ecosystem? We'll produce SAF on site, right? And we can supply lots of folks with it. So therefore, we can be part of a solution. We can do our part.
The IRA came with a whole host of other problems.
Well, yeah,
That's-
but it also
that's-
came with
we-
a whole
that's
host of
not-
opportunities. I
right,
mean,
so-
listen.
Finally, look, it's June the 6th. I assume at some point we're all going on a holiday, not together, but
No, thanks.
We'll fly Virgin.
all right?
We'll fly Virgin.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah.
If we have seats left. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
It's quite full.
You're
Looking
flying.
good. Yeah, summer.
This year, you'll make money just.
Yeah, well, hopefully, yeah.
Barely.
We are
Anyway, more to
targeting
the
that.
point. More to the point. Assuming I was going to give you a ticket anywhere, which I'm not, but assuming I'm going to give you a ticket anywhere for your summer holiday this year, where are you going?
London.
Oh, you're a cheap date. from Vienna to London.
Sydney.
Anywhere except JFK or Heathrow.
Oh, you wound.
They kept me waiting for 4 hours, 40 minutes in JFK Terminal 4
It's
after my
awful.
Virgin flight.
Are you sure it wasn't his fault?
It wasn't his fault.
No, that's the
Absolutely
US
not his.
immigration.
I think it was his
Was it
fault.
our fault?
No, no, it was
No,
no one on this panel's fault. I've offered them free consultancy. The phone hasn't rung.
Nobody tells us what to do, I'm sure is what they
Absolutely.
thought, right?
Yeah.
Where are you going?
I'm probably going to Maine.
Quite nice.
Love to go to Brazil, our new destination, Sao Paulo next year. So,
Oh, God!
Brazil.
Didn't miss the opportunity. You can tell. My God, you can tell you're good at your job. Well, before you all start blaming each other on who's going where, thank you very much indeed, our panel, ladies and gentlemen.